Demond Williams can be a top 5 quarterback.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if you're with us on YouTube, you can see that wonderful gentleman down at the very end over there. That is All-American tight end and All-American commentator Jake Butt from the Big Ten Network, who's joining us today. We're going to have so much fun. Talk about Ryan Walters, one of Jake's old teammates, Greg Froelich, we played with at Michigan. Get into that a little bit later. Jake, we'll get some of your takes on the supporting cast like Denzel Boston, Jonah Coleman, some of the stars that Washington is going to have back on this roster. But Jake, this is a segment that you and I, we talked about this, I think like 2 months ago at this point. We were like, oh, this is going to be so much fun because you came to me and you were like, hey, I believe that Demond Williams could be a top 5 quarterback in the nation. And so I just want to hand the floor over to you so you can just expand on your point a little bit.
Yeah, first off, it's great to see you guys. Hope you've been having a good off season. To the viewers, hope the same for you. Washington spring ball right around the corner. That's always exciting. We get to speculate a little bit, and I know everybody's excited to see Demond Williams, including Jedd Fisch. I think for me, I started to get really excited about him when I listened to the way Jedd talked about him. And I was at a wedding. A former teammate of mine got married the summer before last season. And Jedd happened to be there. So I was just, asking Jedd, and unprovoked, Jedd started talking about this freshman quarterback that he had, that he's like, this guy is going to be special. And I'm like, wait, you got Will Rogers. He's going to be the guy. He's like, listen, I think he's going to compete. And I'm like, okay, this is pretty spectacular. And then just calling the Weber State game, I'm following the camp storylines, and his name just keeps popping up. So then you just have like the physical traits. And what jumped out is Jedd said he's the fastest guy on our team. And I said, oh, he's the fastest quarterback? No, he said, no, he's the fastest guy on our team, at least in the running. I'm like, what are you talking? 4.3 speed, one of the fastest guy on the team. That's extremely rare. And then as the season unfolds and he gets more opportunities, you get to see him throw the ball, and the ball just effortlessly jumps out of his hands. I mean, he's got an absolute cannon attached to his arm. And he seems, to me, You look at some quarterbacks play and they look a little jumpy in the pocket, particularly when they're young. Like they look like they're pressing or trying to prove something. It just seems to me when Demond is in the game, it's like he knows that he's ready and he knows how good he is, and he doesn't need to do anything but be himself. Like the talent just jumps off the screen. I think to be a top 5 quarterback, just to put a bow on this, it's like, part of it's politics. Some of these Alabama quarterbacks that we've had in the past few years, I don't think have been, top quarterbacks in the nation, but they play on typically top 5 teams surrounded by talent, and they put up big time stats. So in order for Demond to be, consistently considered a top 5 quarterback, Washington's going to have to succeed. He's going to have to propel his team to playoff conversations. He's going to have to put up big numbers. That means the supporting cast around him is going to have to succeed. And I also think from a fit standpoint, Jedd Fisch is the head coach and play caller that can drive Demond to a top 5 consensus quarterback season or multiple seasons. So, and for all those reasons, I'm extremely excited. And just the little sample size we got of him last season, the talent is so clearly obvious. The players seem to gravitate towards him too. Usually you see freshmen come in and they're going to make mistakes, or you could just tell. It just seemed like the players knew how good he was. And when he made plays, it would light the sidelines up a little bit too. So ton of reasons to be excited about the future for Demond. Obviously that means a ton of reasons for Husky fans to be excited about the future going forward. So the last thing opponents want to give Jedd Fisch is an electric talent at quarterback. Looks like that's what Washington is going to have.
I'm so glad you said all that, because I remember my opinion carries way more than yours, because you always play the game and know it a lot more than I do. Remember, Roman, when I told you that Demond's going to lead the Big Ten in rushing and passing. He's going to have the most total yards of any quarterback in the Big Ten this coming season. And I know that sounds crazy to say, But if everything comes together, like you said, like Damon is so grounded, I don't worry about can he handle the maturity and now he's the starter. It's like, no, Damon probably would have been the starter had it not been for Will Rogers committing and being a sixth-year quarterback. And like, there's no way you can kick Will to the curb if you're Jedd, and just like how would that look? Like, hey, like, I guess you could if you really, really want to, but I don't think it would have made that much of a difference. And I do think it helped Damon to have a veteran like Will just to kind of learn the ropes, as you will, just so it wasn't throwing into the fire. But he's got all the tools around him now. And I think, with Denzel, with Omari Evans that they brought in from Penn State, I think the true litmus test is going to be, can Jedd not mess it up? And I know that sounds crazy, but like you said, he's the perfect coach to do it. But where we saw times last season, which is like, okay, the play calling is like 80% good, but there's still that 20% where it's like, what are we doing? It's like, now that you don't have the issue of, well, we can't call the entire playbook for Will Rogers like we can for Damon, that issue is no longer there. So it's also the onus is on Jedd to maximize the value, I think, that Damon brings to the table, which Jedd obviously is fully aware of.
Yeah. So two things. One, the fact that Damon was, effective. He was the backup last year. I've seen a lot of guys just throw in the towel for the season and say, hey, this season, I got zero sense of that. Like everything I've heard and understood is Damon carried himself like he was the starter all year. That's the makeup I want out of my starting quarterback. I can just tell you from covering teams, there's a lot of talented quarterbacks that get benched for a veteran, a young talented quarterback that gets benched, and they don't get better. They waste an entire season of potential development. That's not the case for Damon. As far as Jedd Fisch goes, I'll play devil's advocate. Some of the calls, he'll tell you, I think he did tell you guys that in press conference, like a number of times, like some of the calls were costly. But part of your job as a play caller, that was not a dominant offensive line. Like there was plenty of times where what happens is when you have an offensive line that's kind of, working through some things, you have to take risks. Sometimes that leads to us collectively saying, wow, what a play call. But you can't say, wow, what a play call without having the opposite of saying what was going on there, right? For a team like Michigan, when they had a dominant offensive line and they went on their undefeated season, they didn't necessarily need to risk anything. So there wasn't a ton of opportunities to say, wow, what a play call. Wow, what a bad play call. They just line up and run the ball behind their dominant offensive line. There was too many question marks, I felt, for the majority of the season, where it meant that there was going to be times where we said, Jedd, that's probably not the best play call. The good thing is Jedd knows that and recognizes it. And I think that what that also means is he's working to not just address the bad play calls, address the reason he had to take risks in certain situations. So I think that's a big plus going forward and a big positive for Washington.
Oh, Jake, I love that you put it that way. And I want to circle back before we move on here to one thing you said a little bit earlier, where you talked about the maturity and the poise of Damon, where that's certainly something that shined through all season. And it certainly seems like something, from all the times we got to talk to him, that Will Rogers carried himself with as well. And I think one of the other big things that Damon kind of took away from Will was efficiency as a passer, where especially early on when the offensive line was solid enough and it held up over the first 5-6 weeks of the season, that Will was completing passes at a really high rate. And Damon's completion percentage through his 2 starts was 82.5%, 78.5% for the season. But it was just, it's insanely efficient. And especially when you look at doing that against an Oregon defense that had been one of the best defensive lines in the country, let alone the conference, plus Louisville, who had a really solid defense in their own right. He throws for 374 yards in that game on 81% completion. That's something that I would have a lot of confidence in going into 2025 if I were Jedd Fisch.
Again, like that's why the season was handled perfectly by all parties, by Jedd, by Will, by Damon, and it led to just this perfect, long runway to say, go do what you do, and he did exactly that. It's such an underrated thing, Tom Brady. I look at this like Tom Brady is considered the GOAT. And he's not the most talented. He'll even tell you that he's not the most talented, but he had an infectious leadership about him. He had the way he carried himself and approached his process was infectious. That raised the level of everyone else around him, which allowed him to raise his level naturally. It's a back and forth. It's a ping pong effect. J.J. McCarthy at Michigan, he was actually the most talented quarterback Michigan has had in a really long time. But the first thing people will tell you when asked about JJ is his leadership and his preparedness and how he held his teammates to a standard. I hear so often about, man, this guy can really spin the ball, or, hey, look at his release, look at the spiral. That's cool. At this level, most guys can impress you at some level just by throwing the ball, especially in routes versus air. But we look at the best quarterbacks and we judge winning is a quarterback stat, which means you have to be a great leader, which means you have to be mature. I think that's the most exciting thing for Damon going forward, is just the way he carried himself last season. This guy is clearly a professional, and he wants to win, and he wants to hold everyone else around him to that standard. So all those things are just super, super encouraging for Damon, for Washington, for everybody as a whole going forward.
On the other side of the break, we'll dive into the supporting cast, because we've got a message from our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's Monarch Money, code LOCKDOWNCollege for half off your first year. So, Jake, let's shift this conversation from Damon Williams to the guy who's going to be lining up right next to him or behind him, depending on the formation. That's Jonah Coleman. He's somebody who you had some very high praise for in 2024. He announces he's coming back. And there's, behind the guys at Penn State, I don't think it's crazy to say that he could be the second best running back in the Big Ten.
I'm the biggest Jonah Coleman fan, but I love everything about that guy's game. This was huge for Washington to get him to return, because he's such a great playmaker, checks every box. He's built like a brick, he's built like a freaking freight truck, but yet he's quick. He's got great vision and feel, great speed. He's a serviceable pass catcher. He seems to be a great leader too. I just talking to your running back coach, they love Jonah Coleman, another one of those guys that's like a veteran presence in the locker room. Like, in order for your team to win, there's like a certain makeup. You need your best players to be experienced and great leaders. That's Jonah Coleman. And just, you look at this and I'm picturing, it's easier for me to evaluate. We can have a conversation about the skill positions. It's harder for me to evaluate and project what the O-line is going to look like next year. But I will say what does help an O-line is being able to get into read option in different quarterback run situations, and having Jonah Coleman next to Damon Williams, where you can now leave an edge guy unblocked, get a +1 now for your offensive line in the box. That's going to help everybody and becomes really, really challenging for defenses to stop. So, and you got some studs behind him. Adam Mohammad's back, right? Like, we've been talking about him for a few years. We can keep going down the list. Who was the young freshman? Adam Mohammad was the freshman last year, right?
That's
and now
right.
There you go. That's a great duo right there to partner with Damon Williams.
And then one guy on top of that is Jordan Washington. Sorry, Lars, I'll let you jump in there. But yeah, Jordan Washington's another guy who I think is going to challenge Damon for the fastest guy on the team, and in Jedd's rankings at the very least.
Good.
So I'd almost be remiss if I just kind of wanted to find out a little bit more. Like, Scotty Graham played at Ohio State. You, as a former Big Ten guy as well, how can you see like that development? Like, you when you look at Jonah and Adam, just kind of building off of that stable. Like, you can see and sense, because I know Roman and I agree on this. He's the perfect guy to have as your running back coach, because of the type of character that he wants, the type of running back that he wants, and the fact that, as he will tell a lot of recruits, he's done it, but he's played in the NFL. He knows how to get. His favorite story is the John Rahm story, which I just want to really dig into. But more so just about Scotty as a football coach, is what did you get from the sense of him and how he kind of can help mold that running back room?
Yeah, I think the best coaches, like when I think about my best, the coaches that got the most out of me, rarely would the first thing I tell you be about X's and O's. Like, man, it's more so can you get to know me on a personal level, and can you motivate me, and do I trust you to put me in the right positions? Do I trust that what you're telling me to try or to do is going to allow me to realize my full potential? Like you mentioned, like with Scotty's background, like he's walked the walk first, but then he's also just a phenomenal person. Like he's got an infectious, positive personality. He cracks some jokes with you. These are long seasons. Football's always a long season. There's an art as a coach to feeling out when to push your guys and when to pull back and keep things light. I think Scotty has that, natural ability as a running back coach. And again, you go back to Jonah, who's like a complete professional, and just listen to the stories of like Jedd Fisch when you talk about him academically, as a leader, what he's doing to mentor the young guys. It's just one of those things that's really, really special. And those are things that are part of a winning culture. I've been on good teams and bad teams. The best teams I've been on had multiple touch points where you have veteran players that do so much more than just excel at playing football. That champions are great in all things. They don't just pick and choose. So I think Jonah Coleman kind of represents that. And Scotty Graham as a coach represented that as a player and knows how to get it out of his players now as a coach.
So you're talking about veterans. Let's move from running back out to wide receiver. And we look at Denzel Boston. I think he's somebody who also, like Jonah, can be one of the best players in the conference at his position. And having somebody across from him in Omari Evans who can really stretch the field and add some more verticality to this offense, it feels like it's going to do a lot to just help open up this passing game at all three levels.
Yeah, Denzel, it's the conversation could be short and sweet there too, because he's proven extremely, established himself, had a great season last year, showed up in big moments, was clearly comfortable in all situations. That's your wide receiver one going forward. Now, Omari Evans coming over from Penn State, getting to call a couple Penn State games, cover Penn State for a few years now. I think you said it best. He's known as like a burner, a guy that can, take the top off the defense, but he's dealt with some injuries. Like he hasn't, always been able to play every game all season. I'm very interested to see how this works, because for whatever reason, Penn State that's the area they've struggled. They have struggled to develop wide receiver play and translate, talent to production. I trust that Jedd Fisch, like that's one thing I trust that he's going to be able to do, is translate talent to production. So I think all the reasons you guys are excited for Omari Evans, I'm more excited to see what he does in a Jedd Fisch system, just because I think him as a coach and his system unlocks that extra few percentage levels. And those two guys together can be, really special.
And the perfect segue off of that, I think I brought it up either last week or earlier this week on the show, talking about tight ends. I can view Decker DeGraaf, and there's going to be an evolution to him. Obviously, I know you're going to love talking about tight ends, but I look at Decker and I think of how Jedd Fisch can grow this offense, especially with Damon. Maybe line him up as a fullback, and then you either use his athleticism as a running back in that way, or you use it as a play action and things like that. And of course, you can only do that with a good offensive mind to give you the time to do that. When you look at this tight end room, you have Quentin Moore, who got taken out. Was the Weber State or the Eastern Michigan game? Which one was it?
Weber State.
Where he was
by a guy that wasn't even on the field. It was messed up. Yeah.
The definition of catching a stray. But with that being said, having him now come back for an extra season, knowing that he's a great pass blocker, but not necessarily known as the go-to guy when it comes to receiving. Same thing with Cade Eldridge, where he didn't really, let's be honest, get developed as much at USC as a tight end, as a true tight end, because it's just not what Lincoln does with the offense down there. Now that he's coming up with Jordan Papa and Jedd Fisch, how do you see kind of the evolution of the tight end room working with, especially now Devon is the full-time guy? Yeah,
it's good to have Quinn Moore back again. It's always good to have, veteran presence in the room. But Decker DeGraaf, he's got that it factor. I think he was a freshman All-American last year, I believe, right? And I think he's got a chance to be a true All-American at some point in his career. Watching him practice and the chances that I did, and talking to Jedd and, watching him excel in certain positions, he reminds me a lot of myself. We move very similar. I remember it was so fun to play as a tight end in Jedd's offense because, it challenged you mentally. I would have to line up as a fullback at times. I'd line up as a Y, as an F in the slot, as a solo receiver, as the number one receiver outside. And that meant a ton of opportunities were going to come your way. And as a true freshman, he seemed, it was pretty impressive how he was able to grasp some of the complexity there in the playbook. It seemed like he was really comfortable, and that's going to lead to production. I think he's got a chance to catch 50 balls, this season. I do think he's that good. I think by his junior year, and if he doesn't leave for his senior year, you're looking at a 50 catch a year tight end. Reminds me also Colston Loveland, like out of Michigan. And just in terms of there's the build, but then guys that are bigger, like sometimes they struggle to change direction. Like it takes them a long time to decelerate. It takes them a long time to separate. What I felt I did well and what Colston does well and what Decker does well is you just kind of feel these angles, you feel the zones, you feel the leverage of the defender, and you know how to separate. And that's something that Decker showed as a true freshman, and he's only going to get better going forward. So as we think about who, I imagine Denzel Boston's wide receiver 1. Decker could be wide receiver 2, and at times next year, maybe he's even wide receiver 1, depending on the matchup. That's, I think, very, very highly of him.
So, Jake, another guy that you mentioned you speak very highly of, you did a great segment on him on signing day on the Big Ten Network, was Baron Naone, one of Washington's 4-star signees, a tight end out of Oregon. And I love watching his film. He's somebody who's not going to be on campus for spring practice, where I always have to give him a shout out because he's trying to win his 4th state title in baseball. As a former baseball player myself, I love that and love to mention that whenever I can. But he's somebody who he looks physically ready to play this year. And in a tight end room where, Lars talked about Cade Eldridge, there's a lot of question marks in terms of what the depth may look like. Does he seem like somebody to you that could just, even over the summer, without the benefit of spring camp, establish himself as tight end 3?
Yeah, physically he could. I think to your point, like he looks like, he can contribute. I think he's like 6'3", probably 230, 235. Over the summer, they'll get him up to 235, 240. And that's plenty big enough. The big question again is this is an NFL style playbook. There is a lot of verbiage. I'm not familiar with this high school playbook. That is a sprint to try to learn. So that to me is going to be the deciding factor on if he sees the field early and how quickly he does or doesn't see the field early in his career. But did the segment on him. Loved the way he moved. Loved the way he caught the ball. Loved the way he changed direction. Loved his acceleration after the catch. So he's got all the physical traits. Just knowing he's 6'3", I see him more as that move tight end. Okay. Decker, I think, can play both, and that's his biggest advantage. I think you're looking at probably like an F tight end for him in this situation, probably more in that fullback move role.
On the other side of the break, we're going to switch sides. We're going to get into the defense. Right after a message from our friends over at Nissan. We're all about the stats because numbers don't lie. And when it comes to the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X, the numbers are on an MVP level. With the ability to tow up to 8,500 pounds, it can quite literally carry the whole team plus the gear wherever you need to go. It's powered by a twin-turbo V6 engine, delivering the strength and performance to handle highways, back roads, and everything in between. And with room for up to 8 people, the Armada Pro 4X is built for big crews, big adventures, and even bigger memories. Whether you're exploring off-road trails or rolling up to the arena, the Armada Pro 4X brings power, versatility, and style wherever you go. Take your adventures to new heights in the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X. Learn more at shopnissanusa.com.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Steve Belichick's out. Ryan Walters is in. Jake, this is somebody who's got a lot of experience in the Big Ten and is going to be running a very different style of defense than we saw under Steve Belichick. And we saw what it looked like at Illinois. Do you think he can take that success over to Washington?
Yeah, I'm excited to see it. Very different style, similar personalities, though. It seemed like Steve did a great job of connecting with the players and giving them autonomy. They believed in him and, bought into the scheme. I think that was one of the big strengths of, what I heard from players at Illinois is, Ryan Walters is a coach that empowers his players. And really the scheme that he's bringing over, it's completely different. Some people call it a 3-4. Some people call it like a 5-man front. He doesn't bottle that. He doesn't call it either. He was always hesitant to say it's a 3, 4, or 5-man front. But the whole philosophy is he wants to create one-on-one matchups across the defensive line and give those guys a chance to win. He wants to play press man outside and give those guys a chance to win. So it's an aggressive defense, which, typically most of the defensive guys I played with, they like the word aggression. They like the opportunity to win matchups. And clearly, when he was there, exploded onto the scene at Illinois. It's what ultimately got him the head coaching job at Purdue. That was one of the most stout defenses. I mean, they were top in many categories. But they also, this is what I'm curious about, and you guys are going to have to help me. And he had the perfect makeup. Okay, so really what seemed to me the strength of the defense was those 3 interior guys. He had Johnny Newton, who's this 300-pound freak of an athlete. Keith Randolph, another guy that was very similar build to Johnny Newton, those 2 guys, and another big 300-pounder at nose. There's a one-on-one matchup on the center guard. Those guys are used to, center and guards are used to being able to double team and work together. Not in this scheme. Every single opponent had a one-on-one matchup over their center and both guards with great athletes. And then the linebackers, all they needed to do was be able to read keys and flow down and tackle. It allowed for the linebackers to be in great position. They also had Sidney Brown, who's playing for the Eagles now, was their strong safety. He'd come down in the box, guard the tight ends, blitz. Very hard to run the ball against this scheme when it's done right. Now, they struggled. Aaron Henry was Illinois' new defensive coordinator. Year 1, he ran the same scheme as Ryan Walters. Illinois' defense didn't have a great season. Last year was year 2 for Aaron Henry. They took a big step forward. So really, I think Ryan Walters' time as a head coach, I think he's probably evolved as a coach. I think he'll be even better. The question is the body types as it stands right now in position for Washington to have a, top 10, top 15 defense. And I'll withhold judgment until I see what I hear from spring ball in that sense.
So not to just literally go against what you just said and put you in a box here, but with Washington's additions, because we all know Washington didn't have it in the trenches to be at a true Big Ten level last season. That was the litmus test. Jedd went and addressed that with Simone Peppa, one defensive tackle from Utah, or nose tackle, depending on how you want to call him. A big, absolute just unit, like move like two sides of 2 people in one. I've seen him a couple of times now. And you have Tai Uangale, who came from Arizona, and you have Logan Sagapolu, who was a converted offensive lineman turned defensive lineman last season. Sounds like he shed some weight. Do you feel like they did enough in the trenches, specifically kind of the front 7, from what you saw last season and the improvements that they needed to make just generally in that regard?
Is Javon Parker back too?
He is.
That's the plan, because he's coming off a torn Achilles.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, he's not going to practice this spring. Jedd said they're hoping to have him cleared August 1st, so that one's a little up in the air right now.
Okay. No, those are all, Lars. Those are that's positive. That's what you want. That you're saying, okay, great. We're giving ourselves a chance to succeed here. Those are all positive. Probably just a clear upgrade over what they were dealing with last year. That's the truth. This is just a different scheme. Like, this is what he asks of these D tackles is different from other schemes. So it gives guys more opportunity. But what I've seen is sometimes guys, when they're given more opportunity, they get out of place or they aren't as gap sound, and teams can get gashed. Illinois, again, in year 1 after Ryan Walters left, they were running the same scheme. They had big bodies, but the guys weren't, used to playing in those positions, and they got gashed a ton in the run game. So I would say just bringing in, and a lot of those guys are older, right? Like seniors, older guys, a lot of experience. I think that's a big positive. So again, it's a different scheme. This is Ryan Walters. He invented this scheme himself. It's unique in that sense. All I'll say is you guys follow this a lot closer. Like you follow Washington football. I follow the Big Ten. So for me, I'll just withhold judgment. I'm excited to see. I believe in Ryan Walters. Everything you just mentioned should be a plus. But in terms of a top 10, top 15 defense, that's something I'm going to want to wait and see what the storylines are coming out of spring ball.
And Jake, just to add on there for you, there are a couple other defensive tackles that is just depth Washington didn't have last year, where you've got Elenius Davis, who showed flashes at different points last season. Bryce Butler, Omar Khan are guys who we expect to jump into the rotation and play a little bit more. And then on top of that, Antario Thompson, who was at Iowa, is at Western Michigan, was a name we didn't mention. And also Javon Parker's brother, Armon, who suffered a knee injury last year. It sounds like he's going to be back, and he hasn't been able to stay healthy throughout his time at Washington yet, but that's just another guy where you talk about it mattering in the middle. Washington has the bodies there that they didn't last year, which is going to be really interesting to keep an eye on over the course of the season. But those aren't questions we can answer until at the very least the spring ball gets through. Jake, one last thing before we get you out of here. You know Washington's new special teams analyst, Greg Froelich, very well. Washington special teams struggled mightily last year between Chris Petrelli, who came over from Purdue with Ryan Walters, and Greg. What do Washington fans need to know about him and just what this unit's going to look like as a whole?
Yeah, so this is a big plus. I played with Greg. He played offensive line for us. You have to be intelligent to play offensive line. He was one of those guys that played scout team and was like rotating. He played center, both guards, did a little bit of everything. So he's just a glue guy for your team. Started his career as an analyst at Michigan, got hired pretty quickly on Illinois staff under Brett Bielema, was the special teams coordinator over at Charlotte for Biff Poggi, I believe, or was hired onto their staff. And then that was surprising how quickly Charlotte let go of Biff, and now comes over as an analyst to Washington. I think what's exciting is the new rule change too, which is now you can have unlimited coaches. So where Greg might not have been able to be on field coaching a few years ago, now the new NCAA rules will allow him to be on the field coaching. Is that correct? Right now there's unlimited coaches. So that all hands on deck. And it goes back to Jedd saying, where were we deficient? Special teams, like those are margins that cost you games. Like we need to improve. And you're getting a young coach, hungry. He wants to succeed, experienced, highly intelligent, a fresh set of eyes on things. I think that's really exciting. And I can, be a testament of his character as a former teammate of his.
Jake, it's always a pleasure to have you here. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank all everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel through content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please, if it's 5-star reviews, it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.